Good morning, everyone. Thanks very much for coming. It's a great pleasure to introduce Laura Talens and welcome her to the Institute. Laura is at the Institute of Environmental Science and Technology, the ICTA, of the UAB. She's a chemical engineer from her degree, which she did at the Polytechnic University of Valencia. She then did a master in clean technologies at the University of Teesside in England. And she did her PhD in environmental sciences and technology in the UAB. Then she did a postdoc in France at the Institut Européen d'Administration des Affaires, which is a social innovation center. And I took this from her orchid, okay, so I'm going to read this. Her major motivation is to understand the metabolism of materials and energy in socioeconomic systems and the environmental impacts that they generate throughout their life cycle. So I think this is interesting for everyone, just as a citizen, to know what this is all about, but also from our perspective to know what might happen to our materials if they ever get into a product one day. Laura's participated in many national and international projects. I won't give a list, but she's participated in lots of European projects and she's well respected in her area. She's also a founding partner of 2 spin-offs, so she's got a very broad experience over lots of things. And with that, I'll hand over to her and we look forward to your talk. Laura, thanks.
Well, so I hope everybody could hear me well. Thank you very much for the invitation for coming today and also for the kind introduction. Indeed, I have already included in my presentation a few slides just to explain a bit the context where I do develop the research. So I'm a researcher at the Institute of Environmental Science and Technology. Here is an institute of the UAB, so it's not an independent institute, but part of the UAB. But I'm also a professor at the Department of Chemical, Biological, and Environmental Engineering as well here. So just to mention that most of the research that myself and the team are developing is part of ICTA, and ICTA is one of the Maria de Maeztu units. I know that you are familiar with that because you are a Severo Ochoa Institute. Just to mention that we are about over 200 members. We have 9 research groups, and we have 1 PhD program and 2 master's programs. So education is also part of our DNA. And then just some figures for 2024, more than 300 publications and about over 20 PhD theses defended, and we have 12 European Research Council funded projects. So just to mention that we are quite active. And this is the 3rd time that we are having this funding. So we are now starting with the next next research plan, and this is one of the challenges we have ahead. So between this institute, we are called Sostenipra, which comes from sustainable production and prevention of resources, and we are very much rooted on the area of industrial ecology. The area of industrial ecology, even though it might seem a contradictory term, is aiming to apply the concept of ecosystem metabolism to the industry. So what we are trying to do is try to approach the analysis of industry and industrial processes as we are analyzing ecosystems. Yeah, so we are using basically instead of analyzing industry based on economics, we are trying to use physical units like tons, kilowatt hours, and megajoules, and we are using all this information to try to measure what's the environmental impact these processes and products are generating, and how we can optimize the cycles of energy and materials between them. So this is a group that was created back 20 years ago, and this is a picture we took in January this year, just to show that we have also, kind of long also experience on this area. As I mentioned, this group is recognized by the AGAU, and basically what we are doing is developing and applying quantitative tools that can help us advance towards sustainability and environmental prevention. These tools include this concept of industrial ecology, but also eco-design. I will talk today about that, and life cycle assessment, among others. And we have three main research lines. The integrated system analysis of urban nature-based solutions that is led by Gara Villalba, that is working very much on cities and how we can optimize some of the flows that cities are generating as resources. We have the sustainable food system that is led by Xavier Gavarrey. And in here we are doing a lot of experimental work in our building, as I show a bit later. And then we have the other line that I'm coordinating, which is resource management for a circular economy. Just for having some idea of the type of projects we are having. So we are working in different topics like water management, trying to assess the sustainability of wastewater treatment, but also trying to see the potential of rainwater as a resource for the urban and rural cycle. We are also working on electrical and electronic products, mainly on bio batteries, soil fuel cells, I will show later on the presentation, but also batteries for electric vehicles, yeah, and also electronics. I'll show a bit today on the research we're doing on electronics. One of the hot topics we have as well is textiles, because this has come as an urgent topic from the Commission, and we are also working on that. And we are also, one of the struggles we are having is data, no? In order to make all this quantitative assessment, we are having data. So we are also making an effort to generate new data for the environmental assessment of electronics and also of local processes in general. One other topic we are working a lot is on the food and nutrients. I'll show in the next slide that we at ICTA we have a rooftop, and in the rooftop we have an agricultural urban lab that is connected with the building. And we are doing experimental work there. We are growing tomatoes, and we are using water that we are harvesting from other buildings nearby to water these crops. And we are also working on the recovery of some of these nutrients. Indeed, one of the things that we are working now and has to do a bit with this idea of closing the material cycles is the use of urine. So we have one toilet in our building that is mainly devoted as a dry toilet, and we are collecting urine from users. Of course, we are making them aware of the experimental work we are doing. And with this urine, we are doing, along with the Department of Chemical Engineering, with the group Genovoc, we have a biological reactor, and we are doing the nitrification and nitrification process to generate nitrates that can be later used on our urban lab. Yeah, we started with using these NPK nutrients coming from estrobite, from wastewater plants, but now we are going a step further, trying to see if we can really close the loop of the material between the building. So this is a bit what I wanted to talk. We are also, of course, very committed in doing knowledge transfer, and we have several actions. And for me, what is important from here is to show that today I will be presenting some of my work, but I'm not doing this alone. We are a team, and I think that's important to mention. Okay, so the title of the talk today is this towards a more efficient cycle of materials. Yeah, I will skip. Okay, so I will start talking about materials and functionality. I think this linkage is very important for some products where we are making, like in here at ICMAB, I understand you're doing a lot of research on technologies, on new technologies that are coming, and understanding exactly which materials provide which functionalities I think is a core issue. Yeah. Then I will start talking about this concept of criticality that probably in the previous talk, Antonio Turiel maybe already mentioned, I guess. But I will talk a bit what the Commission has defined as critical raw material and what are the actions that are aimed to be developed in the next years. And then this links to the idea of this new regulation which is the ecodesign and sustainable product regulation. And to illustrate the advances that we can do in that respect, I will introduce a case study that is part of an European Pathfinder project called Confetti. And I will illustrate this with a case study of the soil fuel cell that is part of the project. And then I will be closing by just a couple of ideas about the challenges we have ahead. Yeah. Okay, so I will start with this idea of materials and functionality. Let's think that we want to buy a chair. Yeah. We want to buy a chair. We go on the internet, and then we look at the description, and then we see that this chair is tested for a person weighing 110 kilos. No, a chair for a person with this weight is something that this chair can resist. And we are thinking about this chair to be used in a kitchen in our house. So then you will think that this chair fits, no, for the purpose, for the function we want to provide. Yeah. But let's think that there are other attributes we want to consider. No? For example, if this chair is suitable for outdoors, or if this chair, imagine we are living in a small apartment, so we need this chair to be foldable or stackable. Let's say we want to use as well this chair for office work, so is it comfortable? Does it meet ergonomics? Or is it adjustable for user? Let's say we have a family and we have some kids. So is this chair suitable for that? So certainly, maybe this is not, no? So the function that this chair can provide is not the one that we are requesting, yeah? So then what we'll do is go again to the internet and look for other chairs that can meet any of these attributes there, right? So this seems quite straightforward, yeah? So we have a problem with the product we have because it doesn't meet the function that we request. So we look for a substitute, yeah? And this seems quite straightforward and easy for a chair. But there are other cases where the substitution is not, as straightforward. So here I'm showing this graph where you can see on the x-axis the progress that has been done during the past century on the lighting efficacy. Yeah. So we have. So if you see here the efficacy of lights, you see that that we have an early development of these incandescent lamps. Yeah, that were mainly developed in the 1940s. Yeah, and we see that efficacy was probably about 10 lumens per watt. And then at the opposite side, in 2020, you see that now we have other powerful, terms of providing this lighting, these white LED lamps. We have an efficacy of over 200 lumens per watt. Yeah. If we have a closer look to what an LED is, and I think maybe here I'm the less prepared in this room to explain all the materials that are contained, probably much more than I do. But basically the idea is that if we go there, we see, so this is a strip. I didn't took today, sometimes I took, it's very thin strip. And then we have this LED light, which is less than 0.5 centimeters. Yeah, each side. And then we see that there's different elements there, like a protective resin, a cell, the connection, and some polarity mark. And then we have the luminous semiconductor. And between this luminous semiconductor, we can have different mix of materials depending on the function, yeah, that we are aiming to provide for this LED light, yeah. And this is a combination of some elements like gallium, arsenide nitride, indium phosphide, yeah. So of course we can substitute the incandescent lamp that we were discussing at the beginning, but then the substitutes are somehow affecting the complexity of the product that we are using. Yeah. Indeed, if we look back to the early stage development of Industrial Revolution, what we see is that the number of these of the elements of the periodic table that we are using in our current technologies is increasing. So we are having a great variability of these components. Some of these elements, And the point is also that some of these elements are contained, as in the case of the LED, in very small quantities, which makes this difficult to manufacture, but also difficult to recover. What is important in here is that some of these elements are key, no? As you see here on the top, are key for all these transition towards renewable energy and digitalization. Yeah. So because they have special properties and special functionalities. Yeah. So so this is something that is really becoming a very, very hot topic. Okay. So I will talk now about this concept of critical raw material and why it has evolved so rapidly, and then talk about this other regulation. So what is a critical raw material? A critical raw material is a material that is that has a high importance for the economics. So in this case, for example, when there's a high share of this material specifically used in a sector, so we can think about some of these elements I was mentioning before, like the semiconductors, like indium, gallium. They are key for LED, but they are also key for PV panels and other technologies. Yeah, but they have also an associated potential for supply risk. Yeah. So, so the Commission back in 2014 started to work on a methodology, yeah, to define what a critical raw material is. And here, as I mentioned before, this economic importance, the objective is to understand how important the material is for a specific technology and for a specific sector, no, in terms of end-use application. End-use applications are products, okay? And how this contribute to the added value of the EU manufacturing sector. So basically, this is defined as the share of the demand of this raw material per sector and the gross added value. Yeah. So this is how we define the economic importance. On the other side, the other variable is the supply risk. So how likely this element of these materials is likely to have a disruption in terms of supply, no? How risky it is to get this material from to the EU. Yeah. So in here, what this let's say equation takes into account is the concentration of the primary supply, which comes from the global scale, but also from European scale, and it uses this kind of index as a kind of country concentration, and this is also related to the World Governance Index. So how likely a country in the world, no, how secure, no, how institutionally secure, no, if there's a democracy or if there's any other type of governance in this country, and how this governance can affect the potential supply of this material. Yeah. So this is one of the factors that is included. And then there's this so-called end-of-life recycling input rate, which is the quantity of material that can come from secondary sources. So we have a primary production, which comes directly from the extraction, but then we have the recycling. So the idea is that this indicator is telling us how much is coming from the recycling to the total supply of the material. And then the substitution index, which is quite tricky, because then there's some definition done, but I think there's still some discussion behind, because this is not easy to measure. Yeah, but that's how the Commission is doing so far. So I know you cannot read anything from the back, but the important message here is that, okay, if we do a plot of the 66 I think materials that are assessed in the latest assessment in the 2023, we have the supply risk, and then we have the economic importance. So the message is that what we have here in red are the so-called critical raw materials. So this means that these materials are likely to have, so these materials are very important for the European economy. Please keep in mind that we are always having this analysis done from the European context. It's different to talk about critical materials in the US or probably in China, because they have a different economic context. So it is important to highlight that. We are always talking about Europe. Yeah. But the idea is that, yeah, so this red dots here are the ones that, let's say, the critical raw materials in Europe. Yeah. Okay. Here there's a map where you can that help us understand better why they are critical. Yeah. So here in different colors, you see this level of world governance indicator. So, for example, when you have democracy in place, normally this color is green, whereas when you have authoritarianism and democracy is inexistent, you have orange and red. So, for example, from this perspective, we see that one of the materials that has a higher risk, mainly linked to this world governance indicator, is cobalt and tantalum. Yeah, the famous coltan that probably I'm sure you have heard about. Especially cobalt, because the quantity is about 63% of the world production is coming from the Democratic Republic of Congo. Yeah. So this means that cobalt, if you are using cobalt in your technology, you should have a red flag there and think about maybe substitution or think about other strategies that can help you mitigate some of the existing risk. Yeah. Okay, in orange you can see other cases like Brazil for niobium, yeah, with 92% of the global supply. Mexico with fluorspan. Russia, yeah, Russia is one of the main suppliers of palladium with 40%, and then of course we have China, yeah. China is a very rich country in terms of resources. Yeah, they hold almost virtually all the supply of rare earth elements, and okay, so this poses a lot of. This is likely to pose a lot of risk to all the technologies that are using this material. Yeah, so this is a bit the idea that the Commission is doing. Here, there's also a table where they have list for these 51 elements plus this group of metals. You know, they look at the stages extraction, my supplier is Guinea, the share is 63%. The idea is to get, again, a better understanding on where these materials are coming and how likely these materials are to have this supply, so we can we target it as a critical, and that forces us to think about actions that we should take in order to mitigate this criticality. We can also look in Europe, of course, but just to illustrate. Yeah. When it comes to recycling, the message I would like to give is that actually recycling is inexistent for many of these materials. If we think materials like tantalum, yeah, niobium, lithium, yeah. So the contribution we have of the total supply to recycling in the most higher case is over 50%. I think the case is the lead, which is 75%, but it's due because the lead, I think, is very much regulated by the Roche. So companies are obliged to take care of and manage more properly the lead that is used in soldering materials. But you see, like materials like platinum is 25% or palladium 28%. The PGMs, no, the platinum group metals are still a bit high because they are also commodities. So people is investing in the market due to their price. Also the case of gold and silver. But for other materials, this is not. These quantities are not very, very high.
Why europium?
Sorry?
Europium. The only rare earth that is very high.
Yeah, I think it's because there's some, I don't recall exactly now, but I think there's some applications of europium in semiconductors. And probably in this process, there's some not post-consumer recycling, but pre-consumer recycling. So the company that is using europium on the semiconductor as in LED and other is part of the production. So they are closing the loop. Yeah, for that.
Recycling, all the recycling percentage is affected by the lifetime of a given metal.
That's super interesting question. Yeah, sorry. So I've been asked why europium has a high recycling rate. In here is 38%, and we mentioned that is probably due to the fact that that the industry that is already using this metal is putting in place measures to recycle the europium on site. So this is we'll call it pre-consumer recycling. So it's before this europium reaches a product that reaches the consumer that is recycled. So this is already done at industry. And then the second question I have, which is very interesting, and that's something I think I'll talk later on, is about how the recycling is affected by the lifetime of a product. And that's really still, I would say, an unknown. Yeah? I think it is still an unknown, and there's a need to make.
Cycling rate, and I read somewhere that iron basically is almost fully recycled.
Yeah, but in here,
in the applications in iron for hundreds of years.
Exactly, that's the point.
It's difficult to count.
Yeah, exactly. In the case of iron, the iron is mainly used in stainless steel in buildings, for example, structures, and the lifetime of this material on the socio-technological system is maybe over 100 years. So I think the recycling rate of iron is low because we are having a higher demand, and the stock of the material is so much on the market that then you cannot really provide by recycling the demand that you have because the product is staying a long time. Yeah. So of course, in here we could have a more, let's say, deeper discussion on why these recycling rates in some cases are high and why in some cases are low. Yeah. Yeah. That's a very good point. Thank you. Yeah. So yeah, as I mentioned, the Commission already started to work on this topic back in 2011. I like to highlight the fact that at the beginning they have this 14 number of what they call critical raw materials, and now it's 34. This is due as well. I mean, this is due mainly to the fact that the number of materials that were assessed at the time was lower compared to now, but also because all the geopolitics that are linked to some of the materials has changed as well. Yeah. So back in 2010, I don't think the palladium coming from Russia was a super critical raw material, but now with the current context, we see that this metal is now on the spotlight. Yeah. So what the Commission published last year is this Raw Materials Act. So I would like to comment some elements on here. For me, the important message is that if you are using these critical raw materials because of the functionality, it is important to understand, what's the potential risk that is associated with that. I think that as material scientists should be an additional dimension you should take on board on your research when you are thinking about functions, substitutes, and so on. Yeah, because maybe the efficacy we want in our product doesn't need to be, I don't know, this 200 lumens per watt that we were mentioning before. So this is how I think this topic could be somehow brought into your area. So what basically we are seeing now is that, and I'm not sure if you are very familiar with news, but we see that more mines are opening. Europe is opening all mines in order to increase the domestic extraction of some of these materials, because we have seen that we can be very much affected by third parties because we are mainly net importers of many of these materials. So Europe is investing a lot on this domestic extraction, and they have set up these targets for the next years. So 10% domestic extraction, 40% of domestic processing. So we're going to see more in industrial mining processing in Europe. Yeah, and also increasing recycling. Yeah, and then they want to target this maximum sourcing. Yeah, so they don't want to be over 65% of the sourcing raw material. So the idea is to hire more diversity of suppliers of these materials as a way to reduce this potential disruption. Yeah. So they have different axes as well. So they have also defined now what they are so-called strategic raw materials. So these are even still more specific to some of these key technologies, and these are materials for which production is not straightforward. So, for example, if we think about rare earth, yeah. So the metallurgical knowledge we have right now tell us that we cannot go on a mine and open a mine for rare earth directly, because rare earths are co-produced from iron. So the production cannot increase straightforward. We cannot increase the recovery of rare earth without investing in the production of iron and steel. And this happens a lot with many of these materials like indium and gallium that are co-products of zinc, or are co-products of copper, where we think sometimes with the platinum group of metals. So this is why this production expansion is not straightforward. It's difficult, yeah. Of course, they are doing a lot of work on this capacity building, yeah. So again, trying to invest on the mining sector. Of course, one of the hot topics is now the circular economy and environmental sustainability, yeah. So they are started to define some reporting requirements, a list of critical raw materials that can be potentially recovered. So this means critical raw materials that have no dissipative uses, but that are stocked on the products, because this is another angle. Sometimes we're using the materials in a product, and this material is dissipated on the environment while using it. But what we need to take into account is exactly what the stock of the material we have, no? If we are thinking about recovering. Yeah, also about waste recovery and permanent magnets, because permanent magnets are using all these rare earth, the lanthanum, cerium, praseodymium, which are the rare earth metals that I mentioned before that are mainly supplied by China. Yeah. And then the environmental footprint. We'll talk a bit later on that. And then also set up a monitoring framework for this material. There's this discussion about the strategic stocks. We know that the US is having a stock of materials, and they can influence sometimes the price of the market of some metals that are commodities like gold, platinum, and so on. So maybe this could be also one idea. And of course, building up bridges and strategic partnerships. Yeah, this is also very clear. Yeah, and of course, the topic on sustainability and circularity is coming as an important topic. Okay, so I would like now to move a bit to this project and to show you what we are doing in terms of trying to, in one hand, we need to get a more in-depth information about the material that we are using, and more understanding about how these critical raw materials may affect the technologies, and what are the measures we can foresee. Yeah, and indeed in this project, in the project called Confetti, one of the objectives was to avoid the use of critical raw materials and apply this life cycle and circular thinking. Yeah, again, life cycle and circular thinking is very much linked with the closing of the cycle of materials. Yeah, that's the ultimate objective. So as I was saying before, maybe we can think about the substitution of these materials, but of course, maybe we have an effect on the performance, no? Efficacy that we were looking before. And the second strategy is to eco-design the technology. So we have this project called Confetti, which is it's about the valorization of CO2 emissions and nitrogen to produce fertilizers. And in here, we're having three main pieces of technology. We have this electrochemical reactor that the reactor aims to collect the CO2 and nitrogen on using some membranes. And the energy that this reactor needs will be supplied by the so-called soil fuel cell that I will talk later on. And this electrochemical reactor is aimed to have to provide a fertilizer, no, to an agricultural yield. Then the project is also working on this photochemical reactor And the input here that we are using is wastewater or the excess nitrates that this agricultural yield can leachate, yeah, and using solar energy again to produce ammonia, and then this ammonia will become an alternative source of ammonia coming from the Haber-Bosch process. So this is a very big challenge of confetti. And one of the things we were doing as a first stage when we're talking about critical raw material was trying to identify which of the materials that we have started to list that are content of these technologies are critical, yeah. And here I'm showing this figure where you see highlighted in red those that are critical raw materials. So we have 12. So then the point is that now that we have identified that we have these materials that may have these constraints, now we need to on one hand, understand better what's the function of this material, yeah, if there's a potential for substitution, and to think about possible eco-design strategies that can help us design better the products and facilitate the closing the cycle of these materials. So for that, we are using a methodology called life cycle assessment, which is a methodology that is defined by the ISO. Basically, what we are doing here is accounting for all the materials, water, and energy that we are using in each of the stages of the production of a product. And we are also accounting for the emissions, wastewater, and solid waste. Yeah. So for us, this is a kind of first step, quantifying the materials and energy that we are needing to produce one of these technology. Along with that, we have developed in parallel another methodology, yeah, that this is mainly fitted for this project, where we have established this, a participatory approach with all the members of the consortium, and where we are discussing each technology in depth. So we have a first step where we have done 3 different workshops, and we have looked at the different technologies to identify the key components that are part of this technology, especially in the prototype development phase. So we are starting to do this really in the early stage of the project, with the idea of gaining this better understanding of the products and the components that are contained. And of course, we're working here two teams. On one side, the technical experts, so mainly experts like you on material science, and then experts on environmental assessment. Yeah, and I would say that this is quite interesting because sometimes communication is not very straightforward, and this is one of the challenges, understanding when you are defining all the process of synthesis of some materials, what are, how the scale is, what are the materials used, what is the technology behind. So this is something that we have already done. And then on our side, what we have been doing is trying to think about parameters that are very much related to this eco-design. So for that, we have used different, let's say, references. And one of the most important references is this new eco-design and sustainable product regulation. So in this regulation, they have defined different indicators that are aimed to help to make products more sustainable. No? So for example, in here what I'm showing, this is what we call the life cycle of a product, where you have the raw material extraction, the manufacturing of product parts, the product manufacturing, use, and end of life. Yeah, and in here in some color you see some of these indicators. So for example, in green you see durability. Yeah, the durability of a product, which is very much linked with the use and maintenance. Yeah, we see the easy repair and maintenance as well. This is another indicator. Also recycling. It's a core, understanding the content of these materials and how to recycle. So we have some indicators that have to be defined between the life cycle of a product. Of course, we have some indicators that have to do with substance of concern, consumption of energy, water, and resources, and the content of sustainable renewable materials as well. And more from a broader view, we have some other indicators that are more related to the life cycle of our products. So we have been doing this exercise, trying to define these different parameters and trying to understand also how easy these are to quantify. In some cases, they are directly measurable with the life cycle assessment I mentioned before. Yeah. But some others were needed to be discussed with the designers. Yeah. And in order to define which ones, we did this Delphi-style analysis again with experts. We were looking at different specific aspects like the effect on technical functionality of the product, so how the function of a product is affected by the material that is used, how easy it was to measure that, because measuring, for example, the lifetime of a, I'm thinking now of this ionic liquid on a membrane is not sometimes straightforward. You need to do some experimentation. And we wanted to understand what will be the right measure to account for that. Yeah. And of course, this perceived importance. Yeah. So a second result that we have was already a priority of different parameters. So for the electrochemical reactor, for example, we are targeting to account for the reduction of material consumption, the technical life of the reactor, but some of the parts. So this is very much linked with also with the comment before, the use of standard components, the number of destructive steps, because one of the important things is, okay, we have a material that is critical and is very key for function, but maybe we should think how these materials is embodied in the product and how easy and how accessible these materials could be at the end of life. Yeah. So this is a way on how we can also improve the sustainability of our product, no? And the recyclability. Yeah. So we have defined different parameters. In the case of the biobattery or soil fuel cell, we have this total list of parameters. So what are we doing on this case, on the soil fuel cell? And I will come now to a very specific work we're doing. So this is the example of the soil fuel cell. And one of the first steps was to define as I mentioned before, we define always these different life cycle stages. And between each life cycle stage, we define the different type of inputs, materials. In the case of the product part of the manufacturing of product parts, we define the different parts. That are part of that. So what we have started to do is to model, on one hand, the materials that are demanded by the different parts, and also each of these parts that are part of the fuel cell. Yeah. So one of the most difficult part is always electronics. Yeah. And in the soil fuel cell, we have an energy harvester, energy storage, and a potentiostat. And you know probably better than me some of the components you have here in the picture. But then we needed to do some research specific to that. So basically, we have been collecting. We have a database called DOSE, where we have some full material declaration available. But if not, we have to gather all this information. And this is only one example of this. I think this is a resistor, yeah, where you see all the materials that are contained. So this is the type of work, quantitative work we have to do if we want to account for all this environmental assessment of the fuel cell. So here I'm showing the results of the life cycle assessment. So this was a first step we're taking in order to identify the hotspots. So the hotspots is the part of the fuel cell that is contributing the most to the environmental impact. Yeah. So in here we have different impact as environmental aspects, and in colors we have the energy harvester, energy storage, and the fuel cell. Yeah. So you see that the fuel cell in some cases is the one contributing the most. Yeah. For example, in the global warming and the land use, and this is because in some cases because of the use of land, in the case of land use, but in the case of the global warming potential, yeah, when we look in more details to the contribution of each part to the environmental impact, we see that this is due to the material that is used for the casing. Yeah. So one of the things we are now investigating is how to substitute this casing. ABS could be a material that could be quite feasible to substitute by PP, no, polypropylene, or maybe polylactic acid. So this is something we are aiming to do, in this case, to reduce the environmental impact of the product. Yeah. If we go back here, in terms of mineral resource scarcity, that's a bit the topic we're talking now when we discuss material, we see that the major contributor is the energy storage. Yeah. Well, this is, sorry, I jumped this one. So what we were looking at here as well, when we look at the product itself, so to this product, we aim to look at what's the contribution, no? The number of materials that are used in each component, yeah? And what we see here is that the number of some of these components that are used on the electronics is exceeding 30 materials, and for sure, most of them, except the PCB, 10 materials, yeah? So this makes also the analysis quite complex, and then when we have to think about recycling, this is also, I mean, we can expect low recycling rates because there's a high mix of materials, and then it's very difficult to recover 100% of all of them. So this is also one limitation. So indeed, when we talk about resource use, we were looking at the energy harvester, yeah? And what we were looking in case of this, in this resource use, I don't see this here, material resource use, we try to identify which of the component was having a higher contribution to that. And we see that in some cases, in this case is the boost converter, but also the capacitors, and also the multi-layers PCB. So this information should help us guide, no? Should help us guide and think about the capacitors that the components that we are using, and trying to think about, I don't know, different design on the harvester, or different typology of components, yeah, and so on. Also in the energy harvester, we were looking at the use of the different materials. One of the conclusions we have is that for each gram of this energy harvester, we're requiring 36 times, so 36 grains of a diversity of materials. So this also gives us some measure on the fact that even though we see a piece that looks to be very, very small, yeah, all the materials that are behind the use of this electronic component is quite high. So for each gram, we're needing 36 grams of materials, and therefore this also means that there's other environmental impacts that are associated with the use of those materials. In terms of critical raw materials, we were looking at, here in blue you have those that are non-critical, and then in orange you have, and orange and green you have those that are critical, and then we make this different approach. On one hand, we have what we call critical raw materials that are in the foreground system. So this means materials that we have mainly on the piece that we have in front of us. But then there's other materials that are critical as well, that are not directly stocked on the component, but are directly used on the manufacturing of these materials. So, so for example, copper is one of them. Copper is on the foreground because of the PCB. There's a high share of copper there. But in the case of the silver, we see that maybe it's not directly linked, most of the material on the PCB itself, but this silver is needed in previous stages of the manufacturing of the component, and therefore it's also used for this process indirectly. Okay, so the point is that that in some cases we can think about substitutes, yeah. And I think if we are sure that the substitutes can have a very high effect on the performance of our product, then we can think this is feasible to, a decision feasible to take. But in other cases, when we are looking at this life cycle perspective of the product, what we see is that we need to think about how this material is used, on durability aspects, on how how many cycles this material can resist of the product, if this is a product that is consumed or is really stuck on there. How many cycles, or what's the technical life, how many years these products will last. And this is important to understand the lifetime, so how many years this product will be stuck on the socio-technical system. But then what we can do, if we have a critical raw material or one of these special materials that cannot be substituted, then what we need to think is about how this material is used in a component, and how this component is located between the product, how accessible this component is, how many steps, if we want to reach this component, how much we have to destroy our product to access this material, and so on. Because if we are able to do that, that means that when this part will reach the end of life, if it needs to be replaced, that will be easy to do. And this could be more easily replaced, and then you have this part that contains these materials that will be likely to be repaired or maybe recycled, at the end of the life. And of course, if we are doing this eco-design and this modular design of the product, this has a clear effect on the recycling of the product that we are having. And of course, a material that is more accessible and more easy to take back is more, we have a higher quantity and is likely to be more recyclable. So this is one of the challenges we have. So in cases we have materials that cannot be substituted, we should think about the design of the product and how they are embodied. On the other hand, in terms of material cycle, here I'm showing a publication that is a bit old now, but I think this is still very, very much is very actual. And this is showing what we call the material flow analysis of gallium, which is one of these critical raw materials I mentioned before. The figure is actually illustrating the extraction of gallium from ores, the processing of this gallium, refining, and then how this gallium that is refined is finally embodied in these end products. And then you see that part of that will go to products, like mobile phones, LED, PV detectors, and so on. And how this part can be close to recycling at industrial stage, and how much of this is actually dissipating or in stock in the socio-technological system. The challenge we have here is that there's a lot of losses on this material flow that are happening at the extraction and refining. So when we are talking about these critical raw materials, going back to the mining industry and trying to understand all the processes that are used to recover this material is very important, because the more efficient we can make this process, the higher quantity of this raw material we have available. And that will also help us alleviate some of the pressure we have in terms of supply. Just think, for example, in the case of gallium, that only 1.3% of the gallium is actually ending on the stock. So the losses that we are having across the life cycle of gallium manufacturing are very, very high. So in here there are many challenges, because when we are talking about the cycle of materials, it's very hard to get primary data, and sometimes tracking the extraction of these quantities from extraction, use, waste, and recovery is not straightforward. The Commission, thanks to this European Critical Raw Material Act, is making a lot of effort now on that, but there's still a lot of work to be done, basically because sometimes there's a lack of standards for data protocol to harmonize that, and also how usable this data is Yeah, because sometimes you have data in some website, but then if you want to use it, for instance, for this environmental assessment that I have been talking about, this information is not straightforward. So this is becoming one of the main limitation. Yeah. So my key, just for closing that, my key messages will be that we have a lot of inefficiencies on the materials cycles, especially at the early stages. And Europe is now, thanks to the European Raw Material Act, is making an investment to have their own supply because they see that they are very economic important for Europe. So if you are a material scientist, I would recommend that you think about possible substitutes and alternatives, always keeping in mind that the efficacy of the product is kept for the function that you are providing. Think about the chair I was mentioning at the beginning, no? And if not, maybe it will be good. I know that you are doing a lot of experimental work at very lab scale, but I think it will be good already for you to think about how these materials is used on some of these electronic components and how this will be later on embodied in a product, no? And how we can ensure that these materials could be more accessible and therefore recyclable and recoverable, so we can close the material loop of them. So that, I think that's all from my side. I hope that I did not share too much technical information, but I'm now, of course, open for questions and comments.